Hello and welcome. I'm joined now by the master, Luis Scott Vargas. I don't now tell me about that smile. Is perfect. Tell
Well,
me about the thought process in that last game.
uh, let's just say luck, skill, victory. At least two of those three things happened. So I ended up keeping that hand because I could lotus out top and key, and if I found a land, draw a bunch of stuff.
Yep.
And then I had a force of will. The problem with that hand, of course, is mental misstep.
Yep.
In a world without mental misstep, I think that hand is like a lot more defensible. But
Yes, that's fair.
I think given that the matchup is so bad for me, honestly, I think the matchup is very bad for me.
Okay.
I think that makes the hand a little bit better, just because if he has a really fast hand, I mean, almost no hands I have can actually win. Like I can't remove a resolved ascension, and it makes all my counter magic terrible. It makes all his counter magic great. So I don't know. Plus, Blightsteel was pretty good game too, so I figured I'd run it back.
Whitestone was not good at the opening draw. Isn't that the
No,
game?
not so much. I messed up pretty bad game too. Actually, I had the Blightsteel plan set up the turn before, which is why I didn't untap the Mana Vault.
Right.
And then at the last second, I got cold feet. I'm like, whoa, what if I put the Pyroblast on top, not the Blightsteel? And I was just like so nervous that I was like, if I tap this top and it's just like a Pyroblast, it's just gonna be so bad for me. So I just waited an extra turn. Basically, I gave Josh an extra turn and ended up having to force misstep a Taxian Probe.
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, at that point, you seemed like you had so much gas that you weren't giving away a lot of points if you gave away a point.
The problem is every one of his spells is two, so my three counter spells is really one counter spell. The
Yeah.
redundant
No.
counter
Okay.
spell doesn't do anything.
So we were wondering from his perspective, actually, when you had the two Snapcasters, he had the Pyroblast then. We were wondering if he was supposed to Pyroblast to kill both Snapcasters. He could
And
have
just
actually
attack.
put you down to like one. Like
Yeah,
when you brainstormed and kept the fetch, you brainstormed into land, which is obviously
yeah.
unlucky. You kept the fetch land. I think I'd have to go back and look at it. I think that if he just blows his Pyroblast to clear a path through two Snapcasters, you would have been on one with that fetch land.
Yeah, that's certainly possible. I mean, I don't actually know how many bolts he kept in his deck post board. It can't be very many.
Yeah, I don't
So
either.
I was worrying about bolts the whole time, but it's possible he just has 4 Pyromancer, 0 bolt, just because. I mean, bolt's good against Jace, I guess, and Notion Thief. Once he saw Notion Thief, he maybe brings those back in, or
Yeah.
maybe he brought them in just because of it. But I started out all my Jaces because they're so bad anyway.
Okay. How'd you feel when you top decked that Yawgmoth's Well in game two?
Like I was gonna lose, I figured he had a Force of Will, but it turned out he had
But
all Pyroblast, and there is a drawback to Pyroblast. So
yeah, no, fair. And it's
I
funny actually when you went for the Snapcaster end step on Factor Fiction, he had his hand. So he played his Thought Scour main phase, right? I don't know how
right,
much of this you remember. That was his only blue card to go with his Force of Will.
and then he Manamorphosed into another blue card.
Yes. Otherwise, you kill him with the Tinker.
Right, I just tinker for Voltaic Key,
Yeah,
and Key
exactly.
had to be what he was scared of the whole time because you can't Pyroblast Key either.
All true. No, it was a great match. Like game two was crazy. Like we thought Josh had it, and I thought you played it really well. I didn't notice that the play still could have come out a turn earlier. But
Yeah,
then
yeah.
yeah, the third
I
game.
counted up my mana exactly, and I was gonna do it, but then I was like, I think I left it on top, and I'm like 80% sure. I was like, I'll just wait a turn. But
Sure.
yeah,
Yeah, and then
I thought I was losing pretty much all the games. Well, I
third
didn't
game.
think I was losing game one actually. Game one when we both had no cards in hand, I thought, okay, maybe this isn't that bad. Then he played his Yogg-Will immediately, so
Yeah.
that didn't work out so well.
Yeah, the last game, both of you kept Lotus only for mana.
Yeah, I mean, I knew my side, and I certainly figured out his.
Pretty crazy. Wow, that was a fun match. Nice job. So 4-1's got to feel pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty nice.
We'll find out if you are tied for first or hanging out in second as Rich Shay tries to stop the Steve Menendian train.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting matchup, especially since Steve, I think, and probably consciously, upped his percentage for his game one match against, Chris, where he has tons of anti-stacks card, literally everyone I can think of in the format.
Yep.
And that's got to hurt him a little bit against other decks. I mean, yes, Ancient Grudge is good against me and it's good against Rich, but in general, having all those anti-stacks cards, it puts him at a little worse percentage against the blue decks than he would if he didn't have them. So it'll be interesting to see if that actually costs him or whether Delver's still just all around good enough there.
Yeah, I think though that he had to have Rich Shay at 80, 90% plus likely to stay to control Slaver. So I'm sure Steve was looking at that Rich Shay matchup this week and saying, all right, I need to make sure my deck matches up good against this deck.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like Steve actually, tests during the week for this. So
Yeah.
I mean, not that there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah.
If he was like 100% sure Chris was on Stacks, 90% sure, Rich was on Slaver. He was pretty sure I was on Grixis because I played it in a daily event, which is funny because I play a bunch of different decks in daily events, and he happened to look at that one, I guess, or maybe he just thought that was the one I would choose.
Or that
So
was
if
the one
he,
that got posted. They
if
don't all
you,
get posted.
true. If you know your 3 opponents, you can test against them, and it could be that his deck is just really good against all of them.
I'm sure he thinks it's at least decent. I don't think he had the percentages at, he wasn't at Chris at 100 or Rich at 90, but I think they're more like 80%. But whatever. I think these guys are ready. So we will go down to the match. Steve Menendian is 4-0. He's playing a Delver deck this week. He 3-0'd with Doomsday. And now he's trying to run it back again with Delver. Rich Shay playing the Control Slaver deck, which had him at 2-0, but 2-2 feeling a lot worse than he felt when he was 2-0.
Yeah, and looks like Steve's the only undefeated so far.
Yeah. Steve is the only 4-0. These guys are longtime rivals. They've been two of the biggest names in the vintage community for years. They actually played for the Vintage World Championship in 2007 with Steve winning the match. So I kind of definitely rivals. I mean, somewhat friendly rivals, I'm sure, but rivals. Knight's Whisper for Rich.
Fire Ice is a card I actually really like right now. I'm playing one of my decks. Steve's playing one in his. I mean, it's in his hand. Yep. And I think the fact that it's a blue card to pitch the Force, it can cycle if they don't have any creatures, and it kills Young Pyromancer and Goblin Welder and Dark Confidant. Actually makes it a pretty substantial card. Delver, too.
Also kills Notion Thief.
Yep. Which Rich has millions of. Yes. Rich actually really needs this Knight's Whisper to resolve. I don't think you should force it. I mean, trading your 2 cards for their 2 cards when their 2 are random and yours is Force plus blue card is generally not good.
Yeah, especially on a 5-card hand, by the way.
Yeah, Steve did mold a 5. But that Knight's Whisper was very important to Rich. Rich would probably have fought over it, actually, because he has double Notion Thief in his hand.
It's true. He did not draw land either. I mean, he drew a Welder and a Misstep off the Knight's Whisper.
Yeah, Rich actually isn't going to do much. He can play Welder. It would be really funny if Rich draws a red. He's got a decent shot of playing double Welder, and then Steve can just fire both of them.
Oh, jeez.
Because, I mean, we have deck lists, but I don't know if you play around the 1 fire, I assume, is in Steve's deck.
Right. Yeah, Rich draws a Mox, so doesn't do a whole lot. Yeah, he's just got to decide how many Welders to play. Well, he didn't draw red. He's playing 1 Welder.
Yeah.
And drops the Emerald. Steve is supposed to be the beatdown here, right? I mean, he's playing a Delver list.
Yeah, the Delver deck is definitely the beatdown because it doesn't have anything like Yawgmoth's Will. It doesn't have any like card you top deck that will just win the game. Like gush into some action is of course a thing, but it's not the deck is not the deck that wants to go to the super long game. Like, I mean, I'm just looking at Steve's list right now, and he's got multiple misdirections, spell pierces, flusterstorms, missteps. Like all those cards kind of fall off in the later game. Mm-hmm. And his best top deck is an ancestral or a gush into basically more creatures. So Steve doesn't want to go
gushing aggressively.
I don't like gushing on turn 2 once you've played your land. I think gushing turn 3 is a little more reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, you played a gush list last week.
Yeah, I did. It was not as aggressive as Steve's, but they're not that many cards off. I mean, if you don't count all the stack stuff, he basically has a couple extra situational counters and 4 Delvers plus 1 extra Pyromancer.
Yeah.
And I have the black broken cards, DT, Yawgmoth's Will, Vampiric, and a Fast Bond.
Wow. He does play the second Welder.
We're probably going to see a fight here.
Them, right?
Yeah, I would almost assuredly fire them just because it's such good value. And you get to use 2 mana on a turn where you weren't using your mana otherwise. And then Rich is probably going to have to force it just because, I mean, he might not actually. Those Welders are doing nothing right now. Right. I mean, I wonder if Steve just doesn't kill them because they're not doing anything. It still seems pretty hard to pass up.
I mean, I think I'm either casting fire or ice. And it's hard to choose ice over fire when there's 2 Welders on the table.
Yeah, especially since Welders do make Rich's deck better. Like, what if Steve doesn't know Rich's hand, obviously. What if Rich draws like a Dak Faden? And, all of a sudden uses those Welders to really power out his thing, or even just like a Thirst for Knowledge.
Menendian declined to cast anything.
I don't know about fetching there. I don't think, thinning your deck by 1 is pretty irrelevant. So I guess I guess Brainstorm is the only real drawback to fetching, so that's reasonable, I guess. But
Yeah, I think he just wanted the thin. All
so
right.
Rich let Gush
Can't
resolve
see what he
there.
drew. What
Looks
did
like
he?
more lands.
Well, two of
Unless he
those are the
scrolled
lands he
over.
picked up from Gush. I think we've got one card off to the right of our
Yeah.
hand. It's an island. Wow. He thinned, went to all the trouble of cracking effect land to thin, and then drew land. It's an island off screen.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm Rich, I basically don't fight over Gush. They're Gush with no board, with a lot of cards in hand. Again, you're in the same position of trading 2 cards for 2 cards with Force of Will. I mean, I would manage in a Gush or Pyroblast it, but I certainly wouldn't. Go for doing that.
And now you fire because you get nothing else to do with your floating mana.
Well, you almost are forced into casting either fire or ice here.
Yeah,
I like casting fire. I think it's too greedy not to. I mean, maybe if you know Rich's hand, you don't do it, but I mean, I don't know how good Steve is at reading there. You can read him for not having DAC or Thirst because you don't cast the second World over using it, but it still doesn't mean he couldn't just draw one of those cards.
Right. Now, do you force a will this if you're Rich Shay?
Yeah, I guess not. I would have been inclined to, but it depends on how much you value Notion Thief. If you think that fighting over Notion Thief is way better, then maybe do that instead.
Yeah, he's clearly setting the game up to be a Notion Thief game.
Yeah, these Night's Whispers are doing some work here.
All right.
Sabo's Web, yeah, people got pretty filthy this time around. I mean, I'm not gonna lie.
Such a beating. Yeah, his next opponent is Chris Pakula, right? That who that's for?
Yeah, Chris is he's got Mutavaults and Mishra's Factories that get Sabo's Webbed. And Wastelands, I guess, if they stay tapped.
Yeah, pretty crazy. I have not seen Sabo's Web in Vintage.
Yeah. Sabo's Web not doing anything but cycling unless Steve taps one of his Wastelands, but I mean, Steve is in a really bad position here. Like, his deck's not built to go the long game. Rich has a lot of cards in hand, and Steve has nothing on the board and three pitch counters in hand, a misstep and 2 force and now 2 misdirections. So
wow. Yeah.
Steve's best chance of victory is Rich going for an Ancestral or something. Rich has the combo. He's going to set up Dak Fade Notion Thief. And Rich has the counter magic to punch it through. So
yes, he does. He declines.
Steve's
for Notion Thief first.
Yeah, he's going to end up turn Notion Thief. That way he could maybe snipe a Gush if Steve had it at main phase.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
He's going to cast Trigon Predator, which honestly, if you're Rich, I actually don't think you fight. I mean, I guess looking at Rich's list, what does he have to get rid of? He doesn't actually like Lightning Bolt, apparently. No, he's got 2 Lightning Bolts at the bottom of his list. So he's got some answers to Trigon Predator, so I almost think you just don't care about it.
Yeah, I think you're happy to see Steve tap out because it makes you much more likely to get off Notion Thief's DAC.
Yeah, I think you just care about that. The fact that you're hemming your opponent, or mind rotting, I guess. You're mind rotting your opponent and drawing 2 cards.
Well, Steve obviously has to. Steve wants to fight over the Notion Thief, it looks like.
Yeah,
so he's going to force a will pitching misdirection?
Then Rich. Yeah, he pitched misdirection. Rich is going to force back, I think, and then Steve's going to misdirect back, and then Rich is going to force back. So the real question is, what's the last card Rich wants in his hand? I actually would probably just go with second Notion Thief, just in case your first one dies. Notion Thief was good for me, too. It sniped Raptor's Manamorpho.
Yeah,
it got him really good.
Yes. It's done some work this league. I mean, you got Bob with it, too, in response to a Jace activation.
I didn't really, because I could have just killed the Jace, but I mean, it feels like, with Chris slow rolling the kill for a turn to drop Darksteel Juggernaut, that is kind of what we're going for here.
All right, there's the force back, and Rich agrees with you. Notion Thief is the last card he's gonna under to this Force of Will. Now he's thinking, come on, Steve, you can't have Force of Will blue card left, right?
Right. Yeah, that would be insane. Mind Wreck Trap would be kind of cute there.
Yeah, sure. So the Notion Thief is going to resolve on Rich's side. The Trigon Predator is going to resolve on Steve Menendian's side. This is Steve's main phase. So he's going to say go now, and Rich is going to very quickly untap and drop Dak Faden, the greatest thief in the multiverse. And Dak Faden is going to steal some cards.
He's going to steal this game. I mean, he's going to empty Steve's hand. Not that those 2 cards did anything, but Rich is just going to get to draw 2 cards for free.
Yeah, so Dak Faden is going to target Steve Menendian, draw 2, discard 2. But Notion Thief says, no, you don't get to draw them. Rich gets to draw them. So it's Rich draws 2, Steve discards 2. That combo is just spectacular. Rich Shay's the first guy I saw put this together. It's been a fixture of his Control Slaver lists ever since he started playing Vintage on Magic Online. And wow.
I have both those cards in my deck. Granted, it's 1 Dak main, 2 Notion Thief sideboard, but, they're still present. Rich now in a position where he has to use his Wasteland or get it tapped down by Web if he taps it for mana.
Yeah. Plus, he knew there was no gush, so he got a window where he could cast it without risking a gush since all the cards were gone. And now Menendian, what? He can't even pressure Dak, right?
Yeah, he can attack
he
Dak for
wins
2,
this-
but that's just not even close to a winning race. And if he wants to kill like one of Shay's lands, like a Ruby or an Emerald, he has to not attack Dak. I think you attack Dak, but you're not winning doing that. It's just slightly better than not doing it, I think.
Yeah, I think you attack Dak because what else?
Yeah, Steve's 4-0 playing lands is what someone in the chat said. Hey, Legacy Lands is a deck that people play. And so now, looks like, yeah, Steve is deciding who to attack. You have to play the Misty because it's going to get emptied by Dak.
Yeah. You can't keep cards in hand until you have an answer to Dak. At least if he attacks Dak, then the top deck Lightning Bolt would kill it, right? It's a it's +1, right, for the first ability?
It is, yeah.
+1. Comes in at 3, goes up to 4. Yeah, you have to knock it down to 2 and then hope you top deck a Lightning Bolt, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's your best shot. I mean, you're not going to win. Rich has backup copies of both pieces. Yeah, Vintage is a very different animal than it used to be. There's a lot of new players running around. Looks like he's just gonna try to cut Rich off red, which isn't really gonna work, given that Rich is drawing 3 cards a turn. Maybe he figures that
only red mana. That's not nothing.
Right, but Rich doesn't have a ton of red cards in his deck. His most important one right now is in play. And again, when you're drawing 3 cards a turn, it's not like he's not going to have it. So my assumption is that Steve just wants to
Time Walk, Force of Will.
Steve just wants to try to burn Rich out, like just attack his life total because he's not killing Dak anyway. Yeah, this game is basically over. Like,
no, if they were playing in person, I think Rich might just show him his hand and move on to game 2.
Yeah, I mean, as Ifro, asked me, he's like, hey, because I conceded game 1 against Josh when he was going off with Yogwell.
Right.
And Ifro's like, maybe you don't concede there because, like, just to show everyone, like, his deck going off. I was like, oh, yeah, I didn't even think about that. Like, he was just, I could never win. So there's something to be said for playing it out. Then again, I don't think Josh needs to play it out when I have Vault Key going. I wouldn't advise that. Steve is not literally 0% chance to win from his perspective. I believe from our perspective he is, though.
Actual 0. Yeah, Rich, I'm on actual 0%.
Yeah, Rich can set up the, like, Jace Bouncer Trigon, Mind Twist you with Dak. Like, what Rich needs to do is, like, ultimate Dak and then, like, start icing things to steal them. Or yeah. Rich might be able to... I don't think Rich can actually set up, like, an actual win this turn, but he's put himself in a position where I don't think he can lose.
Yeah, maybe he's got Force of Will blue card. Steve has no cards in hand. Next turn he gets to... Is he attacking for lethal next turn or the turn after? I guess it's the turn after.
No, he dacked for lethal many turns ago.
Yeah, exactly. Attack for lethal, Dak for lethal. I'll allow it.
So there's some conspiracy theories going on Twitter in the chat that the initials for this league were not chosen by chance.
I certainly noticed that when I picked you to win it. I will admit to that.
I'll have everyone know I had zero input into that. That is actually a factual.
That's true. No. Stephen Berkland came up with the name, actually.
Alaska? That's what I used to call him when he went to, like, GPs and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So, Steve, going for those percentages, cracking his Misty to thin out his deck a little. Not a whole lot he can draw here, though. Mm-mm. I mean, it's pretty hard to concede given its vintage. Like, yeah. But this is one of the reasons that I don't like playing the Delver deck. I think the deck is very good. I'm sure it was a great choice, especially since Steve again tested his matchups to try to figure that out. But look at that game, my game 1 against Josh when he had Pyromancer Ascension going and I had no cards in hand. I just drew a Yoggle and drew like 7 cards. Like, Steve has nothing that can do that in his deck.
Yeah, you can't do that unless you have Yawgmoth's Will in your deck.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously his graveyard isn't set up for it either, but, like, if he was playing a deck that had 20 cards in his graveyard, 15 cards in his graveyard that had Yogwill, pretty good chance he can, like, Yogwill, kill the Notion Thief, draw some cards, whatever. I mean, he might be too far behind this game regardless, but that's the sort of thing I like having access to in Vintage, just because sometimes you just win.
Makes sense to me. I definitely wanted more broken cards in my deck this set.
Well, you went for the max broken cards, which means that means that there's very few games that you end up like this. You don't end up in a top deck war all that often because
No, I usually win or lose by turn 3.
yeah, I think for style points, Rich needs to Ancestral Steve here, just to make Notion Thief earn his keep. But I think Notion Thief's already well done that.
Oh yeah.
Rich casting the Yogg Will for basically minimal value, just time walk to deal an extra 3 points of damage and draw 6 more cards.
Minimal. He's like, if you gotta undo the work Trigon Predator did. Like Trigon Predator killed his Moxes. You can't be allowing that. Gotta get him back.
Yeah.
Crucial.
So Jar of Fortune says that Delver gives control with Gushes and Cantrips because it has a higher density of threats and less of mana. And that's true. I mean, that is part of the reason I think Delver is good, is that it gets ahead. It plays not a ton less mana. It can't play 7 less lands. It plays 2 less lands or 3 less lands. Depending
but it's incremental edge, incremental edge, incremental edge. Right. It doesn't have the haymakers. It doesn't ever say, "Oh, look, Yawgmoth's will."
Yeah, my point isn't that Delver's a bad deck. Far from it. My point is that if the fight turns out where Delver gets behind, it's hard for it to just drop the elbow. It can't come back from a really losing position. That's just not how the deck is built. It's built for the low resource games. It's built for the games when my game 1 against Josh, we both had 2 cards in our hand. That's the kind of game that Delver's very well poised to win because it has no expensive cards and all its cards cost 1 or 0 mana, and it has 0 mana draw 2s that get it back. So overall, Delver plays those games very well. Delver doesn't play the I have 7 mana, no cards in hand, I need to draw something game. So I mean, it's a relevant point that Delver has less lands, but my point is only that sometimes even a threat dense or deck still gets one of his card draw Pyroblasted, the other misstepped, and the opposing deck resolves Ancestral, or in this case 2 Night's Whispers, and then you're kind of behind. So
look at that hand for Rich.
Oh yeah, I've far from stopped worrying about the game because I mean Rich just has it all. He can just draw 20 cards. He's actually going to just attack and then fire Steve here.
You thought your fire was good, killing 2 Goblin Welders. Watch this one.
Oh, a DAC emblem. Okay, we're going for Max Rubbins now.
DAC emblem? Well, I don't even know what the DAC emblem does.
When you target something, steal it.
So he's stealing
with a spell.
Menendian. That's awesome.
Yeah. So pretty good.
Not bad. All right, Rich Shay, up a game. We do have the deck list. We'll look at Steve Menendian's list first. I don't know if there's anything relevant going on with sideboarding here.
Well, Rich does have some interesting stuff going. He's got Pyroclasm is actually good in the matchup. It's very good. It kills all the young Pyromancers and all the tokens and all the Delvers.
Absolutely.
And I don't hate Pyroblast. It kills Delver and all the spells.
Sure.
I don't love Nile Spellbomb. Just it's not a graveyard deck. Even though I like boarding that card against blue decks in general. Thoughtseize is pretty medium. I don't love the idea, especially against a Wasteland deck of having cards like that don't play to the board. I don't like
a lot that he has to take out, right?
No, I don't like Mystical Tutor much. Just because Mystical Tutor against a deck full of missteps and Pyroblasts and misdirections and stuff, you're not tutoring for Ancestral. In fact, I just don't like Mystical Tutor as a card anymore. I don't think it's very good in Vintage right now.
No,
I think there are times when it's been great, and it's great in your deck, combo. But in the blue control based decks, I've cut Mysticals a long time ago.
Yeah, no, I sideboard them out even in the Oath deck sometimes.
Yeah, Rich also wants to cut Sabo's Webs. Just this isn't the matchup for that at all. So,
do we have an deck list?
Yeah. So Steve's sideboard basically just has more anti-control stuff. He has, Pyroblast, Flusterstorm, Null Rod, and it looks like more Wastelands too.
Interesting.
Though this is probably not the matchup for Wasteland. Rich has, a number of basics and
so much artifact hate.
Yeah, see, I mean, this is a deck that you would never play in a tournament, because unless you knew for some reason that a third of your opponents were playing stacks.
Sure.
But yeah, if I'm Steve, I guess I'm looking to side out. There's not a whole lot. I mean, Trigon Predator didn't look great that game. Mystical Tutor I don't like here either.
Sure.
Post board Mystical Tutor also gets worse because when players have Pyroblasts, the card is just less powerful.
Right.
And so I think Steve just wants to look at some combination of Pyroblast, maybe another Null Rod. I mean, you don't want to overload on Null Rod / Grudge type stuff, but drawing one a game is very good. So it's kind of funny.
I think Null Rod is particularly decent against a Welder deck. I mean, I guess with this version of it, Rich isn't playing the actual Mindslaver lock that he had in the first set.
He would also side out Mindslaver, I think, here.
Yeah, that's probably true. All right. Well, it looks like these guys are ready for game 2, so let's get to it.
Yeah, and I think given that Dak Faden plus Welder plus Battlesphere, is a little more interesting. Though actually, is Rich still running the Battlesphere?
Yes,
It
pretty sure.
It actually, yeah, he's got it still. I was pretty sure. Yeah, so because of that, Rich could operate on a NORAD pretty well. I kind of like Grudge more. It turns off Welder a little bit better, but.
All right. Rich has...
Rich playing red-black control with Swamp Mountain, Pyroclasm, Demonic Tutor, Strip Mine in his hand. And it looks like Steve does like the Trigons here, which, again, in this particular case, I'll defer to Steve's judgment. He knows this. He knows this matchup better than I do.
Sure. He's got what? Turn 2 Trigon. He does not have red mana.
He doesn't have red. This hand would be very good if he had red, because he could have turn 1 Pyromancer and a Trigon with Misdirection backup. That being said, you can't mulligan at this hand because you can still just go Sapphire Preordain.
Both players have a Strip Mine.
Yeah. Though Rich at least is using the old picture.
Agreed. You just preordain here if you're Steve?
Yeah, I mean,
Sapphire?
Saving it, yeah, definitely off Sapphire. Saving it for Misdirection doesn't seem super relevant.
You can if you get desperate.
Right, if an Ancestral is the only card you can really misdirect at this point.
Agreed.
And you don't care what you're pitching when you do that. And you do need to find red. I mean, you can't... Like, turn 2 Trigon is fine, but it's not exciting, especially if Rich doesn't play an artifact on turn 1.
Which it doesn't look like he's gonna. Not that Steve knows that.
Yeah, the chat saying that Steve doesn't have any graveyard hate because he knew none of his opponents were playing Dredge, or at least had to be like over 95% sure. And while that's true, there's not a whole lot of use for graveyard hate outside of that. Some people mentioned Yawgmoth's Will, but the way to fight Yawgmoth really isn't graveyard hate, except for, in particular, Nile Spellbomb. Because Spellbomb is such a free roll. Like I like it a lot in the black-based blue decks, just because you can just play it and cycle it and then get a pretty good advantage out of it. So, oh yeah, I was trying to wonder where we were exactly. Then I remembered it was Steve casting a Preordain. So, though I have to admit he's actually played pretty fast with everything except Doomsday. I think Doomsday in particular has its challenges.
Well, so. he played last week's match pretty slow, but this game so far has, I think they've used about the same amount of clock. I don't have any problem with this week's pace of play.
What you could do is pre-record it and play it in 2x. That actually would have worked fine for last week's game.
Yeah, we actually cut stuff from last week's game, but cut like 15 minutes of thinking.
Well, that's reasonable. Right. That's why I didn't notice, because I watched the replay and I was pretty happy with it.
Strip Mine on Tropical. She's actually pretty bad for Steve's position.
As it turns out, yes. It's always really funny when the Wasteland or Strip Mine deck gets Strip Mined out. Like, Rich is definitely not the Strip Mine deck in this matchup, but he kind of got Steve. He also kind of got himself by drawing Battlesphere, but
he's got 4 lands in his hand. Like, when you have 4 lands in a Strip Mine, you just roll. It's like you're rolling a d6, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you roll a 6 and you just screw them.
Against Gush decks, you kind of want to strip before they have double blue, because as you saw in your matchup, you really don't want to Wasteland when your opponent's got potential for Gush out.
Oh yeah.
So now, if you're Steve, he's actually in a spot where he gets to choose to play Trigon or Pyromancer, but not both, because he has to get either red or green off his fetch land. I'd lean towards just playing the Pyromancer here. I think that, first of all, lets you keep Trigon as a force ammunition, which I think is good. And Rich doesn't have any artifacts. He would have just played.
Yeah, if Rich had Mox, they'd probably be on the table. I think Pyromancer might just be better here.
Yeah.
If only he had a Taiga in the deck.
Yeah, I've thought about that sort of thing, but I don't think that you really can justify it in most situations there.
Taiga seems pretty terrible, but it's kind of funny that if he had a Taiga in his list, I think he would actually get it here. I think.
Yeah. Yeah, with Gush, you can't obviously play that card, but
no, he still wouldn't get Taiga here. Not with Gush's deck.
So
it's less in his hand.
I'm predicting Volcanic Pyromancer here, but we'll see if Steve disagrees.
Yeah, that's my line too.
And then if you're Rich, what do you do on your next turn? You know that you're going to get Strip Mined at some point here.
Pyroclasm is pretty good against a Delver. Pyroclasm while your opponent is tapped out.
Yeah, Pyroclasm will tap opponents tapped out, dodges Spell Pierce and Flusterstorm, which is nice. The good thing about Pyroclasm, though, is it's not a lightning bolt. You don't have to kill the Pyromancer right away. You could like wait 2 turns and then kill all the tokens too. So,
True, but I mean, you're effectively killing all the tokens whatever turn you do it.
right. The question is, what does Drawing Portal is actually quite good for Rich there because he's going to want to. I mean, he's got a bunch of 2-mana plays, and he's going to want to kind of convert those into an advantage. But Force helps because his hand is so clunky. And he knows he's going to get strip mined here, or at least highly suspects it.
Well, yeah, so, as soon as he tries to fetch land or plays any other lands, I think you Pyroclasm him.
Yeah, the problem I think with Demonic Tutoring is what are you tutoring for? And then like, if you end up tutoring, then getting strip mined, and then your spell gets fought over, I mean, I think you end up in a less good spot. Though Rich is running it. I mean,
yeah, he goes for the Demonic Tutor.
Problem is if you get like an Ancestral here, you can get Mental Misstep so easily. You've played no Mental Misstep targets.
It can get misdirected too.
Yeah, Steve has double misdirection on his list. You actually have to pay attention to that pretty significantly because I don't think it's possible to win if you get your Ancestral misdirected. In fact, I think the rules say you have to concede at that point. Or at least any sort of sporting play demands it. So like, what do you get here? I mean,
I don't know.
He can if he really wants to do something. The thing is, he drew Battlesphere, so he couldn't even get like a Mox or a Soul Ring to tinker with, and Mox would be a lot better because it doesn't get misstepped. I mean, getting something like Dak Faden doesn't really make a ton of sense. It looks like he's going for the Ancestral. Yeah, I think this is a risky line. Ancestral has gotten so much worse. I was actually Owen actually texted me. He's like, how are these people? How is everyone like not playing Merchant Scroll? Anyone who doesn't play Merchant Scroll in their blue decks, is an idiot. And I'm just like, well, that would have been true, like 2 years ago. But I mean, now that Mental Misstep is in the format, I think Ancestral just got enough worse. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, maybe Owen's right. He's played a lot of Vintage. I mean, he won Vintage Champs one year. But I think that a misstep has made Merchant Scroll for Ancestral a risky enough play that I don't really like it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, people aren't mysticaling for Ancestral anymore either. It's part of the reason Mystical is so bad.
Yeah. Time Lock's really nice with Pyromancer, that's for sure.
Uh-huh. Makes a token, gets you another attack phase.
I think Steve's actually in really good shape this game. He's like, presumably Rich is going to go for Ancestral. Steve's going to misdirect. Rich is going to force. Steve's going to force back. Steve's going to just end up with 1 million cards in his hand, and Rich is going to,
have nothing except end facing a horde of tokens.
And yeah, I mean, maybe he resolves a Pyroclasm at the end of all that, but he still gets strip mined, and Steve has 3 extra cards.
Yeah.
So looks like Pyromancer's going to get in for 2, then Pyromancer plus token going to get in for 5. This would have been a perfect turn to Gush if that Sapphire was an island, but unfortunately, Moxes have some small drawback.
There's the Volcanic.
Yeah, I don't like Gushing here. I actually think Gush is better. You're going to get in a fight next turn, so I think Gush is better than, like, as a blue card is better than a random card here.
You're not playing the Trigon either?
Well,
just
he can't.
Blue card for misdirection. Oh, you can't. Sorry. Of course. Still no green mana.
But even if he could, I think he wouldn't. I think, like, if your opponent's tutoring, you've got to gear up for a fight. And given that Rich knows about Strip Mine, is going to be on, like, 2, maybe 3 mana if he has Mox, I think Steve's got to think there's a pretty decent % chance that Rich got Ancestral, which puts Steve in, pretty good spot here. Funnily enough, Rich is in his best spot if he goes Mountain Pyroclasm to kick things off, which I think he wants to do, actually. He's not really in a hurry, and if he gets in a fight over Ancestral and loses, then he's going to take a bunch of extra damage off that Pyromancer.
See, I would have played the Pyroclasm last turn. I mean, it's basically the same scenario here.
I think I like playing Pyroclasm last turn as well, just because.
But it's almost the same as
you're gonna have to do it anyway. Why get into a position where you take a bunch of damage off Pyromancer lands or Pyromancer tokens? Like, imagine Steve again had the Time Walk. Imagine if Steve had like an extra counter. Like, Steve was also tapped out. So now Rich presumably is gonna go for the Ancestral at some point. Though into Steve's untapped mana, maybe you just don't. But if you don't, you would have probably Pyroclasmed. So I think maybe we're looking at an upkeep Ancestral here. No, it looks like not. Yeah, Steve can't lose any fight right now.
Wow.
In fact, Steve can actually just counter the Pyroclasm without even too much fear.
When Flusterstorm helps.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Rich could have gone Ancestral upkeep. Maybe he was setting up for end step, but he gave Steve the ability to draw that Flusterstorm.
Yeah, I mean, upkeep makes sense. I think end step is just worse than upkeep, just because Steve does not have very many cards he taps out for. This isn't like, maybe he'll play a 4-drop And giving Steve an extra card could be the difference between, winning the fight and losing it. Now, if you're Steve, you can actually go for the gush here. You can float double blue and you can gush. You look like you're pretty good in a counter war. The question, I mean, you've got to be thinking, what did Rich tutor for at this point?
Yeah. I mean, it could still be Ancestral.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
It looks like he is going to go for the main phase gush, floating a blue and a red.
I guess red helps you cast Pyromancer if you draw it. And you don't know about Pyroclasm in Rich's hand specifically. You do know that Rich has the card in a sideboard, though.
Yeah.
So now if you're Rich, it's kind of tempting to Ancestral here.
As a response, that's what I would do. I mean, not that I necessarily would have wound up here, but no, Rich is still playing patient.
Yeah, Rich. So we've got a Flusterstorm and then one mystery card for the time being. And that means Steve's probably just going to pass the turn. I mean, if he drew a green source, he could play Trogon. Oh, yeah, so Rich does not look like he's going to resolve a relevant spell this game.
No, Steve's got everything.
Well, he's going to resolve Ancestral. It's not going to do exactly what he wanted.
Wow. Well, at least Steve's going to have to discard.
Yeah, that's not even necessarily true, I think, because I think Steve's going to pitch a card, and then Rich is going to force, and then Steve's going to counter. And
wow.
Yeah, this is brutal.
Misdirection. No, Ancestral me.
Yeah, getting Ancestral Misdirection is a beating.
Getting Force of Will Pyroblasted is also a beating.
Yeah. I would probably use the Flusterstorm here.
Oh, okay. Looks like that's what Steve's going to do.
Just because you have two Flusterstorms and Pyroblast can do stuff like counter Jace or Dak Faden.
Yeah, you're right.
For the only time in history, Flusterstorm not going to counter all your opponent's spells in the stack.
Wow, what a blowout.
Yep, so Steve's going to end up with 7 cards in hand. Rich is going to have nothing, and then next turn, Rich goes for Pyroclasm, and it gets Flusterstorm most likely. At that point, I guess Steve is nearly out of counters, except Steve's going to draw 3 cards here, so that's not even true. And he has 6 tokens. He almost has lethal tokens. Like he's 2 turns certainly lethal, and depending on what ends up getting cast, like a bolt makes this lethal immediately.
How about a Fire Ice?
Not quite, because he gets to attack Rich down to 4 and then cast Fire Ice. Rich can't
over this Pyroclasm. How many tokens does this fight make?
That's true. So Steve's going to Flusterstorm. Rich can actually misstep 1 copy of Flusterstorm, pay for the other, and then Steve can just
force a will.
Yeah,
which actually makes the lethal token. Hilarious.
Yep. It's pretty good. The only reason not to do that is that maybe Rich has his own Force of Will, but you can't really put Rich on Force of Will and blue card and not have fought over it last turn, so we would have needed to draw it.
Yeah, here comes the mental misstep, targeting 1 copy of Flusterstorm. Rich plans to pay for the other.
Yeah, this actually makes the Pyromancer lethal without fire, I guess, because Rich had to pay 2 life for the misstep, yeah.
Funny. Wow.
Yeah.
Looks like we're going to get a game 3.
Most definitely. Unless Steve decides for some reason not to fight over this, we're going to game 3.
I can't imagine. I mean, it's clearly lethal. I mean, what is Rich going to do? Rich is tapped out. It's Rich's main phase.
Yeah, and
all right.
I mean, again, unless Rich had blue card Force of Will and had chose not to use the Force of Will last game, that would be the only way you could possibly explain that, and that does not make too much sense.
Even then, you were probably trading your Force of Will blue card for his Force of Will blue card at some point.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there we have it.
Yeah. Steve Menendian, 8 power to Rich's 8 life. We are going to game 3.
There were no Dak Fade and Ocean Thief appearances this game.
Yeah, no, it felt like Rich had some options. He could have played the Pyroclasm on turn 2. He opted instead to Demonic Tutor. You know, he had, went for end step Ancestral. I don't think any of that mattered. Like, I don't think with as well as Steve drew that game and sort of how well he was just able to execute his game plan, I don't think any of that actually matters.
I think this game could have been a very different if Rich had Pyroclasm, because I don't know if Steve would have fought over that. And then maybe Rich doesn't tutor for Ancestral specifically, because I think Ancestral is actually very weak against Steve's build with all the missteps and all the
2 misdirections
and all the misdirections, right? That being said, Steve drew all Pyroclasts and Flusterstorms afterwards, so maybe Rich wasn't resolving anything relevant anyway. So
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying. Like, I don't
Yeah.
agree with all of Rich's decisions, but I don't think they affected the game result for whatever that's worth.
I'm I'm mostly agreeing. I'm saying that like I think that the game probably ends up in Steve's favor, but it's very very different game. Like and when you have a very different game, I mean, who knows what happens? Like maybe Rich draws a card that can't get pyroblasted or flusterstormed, like he's like a Night's Whisper with a lot of mana and kind of ends up somewhere else. Hardcast Mirror Battlesphere.
Yeah, yeah, it would have been a very different game. That's totally true. All right, is that a mulligan from Rich Shay? Looks like he's down to 6 cards here in game 3.
Into a very good hand though.
So he did. Mox
Yeah,
and land.
I mean, he can turn 1, get Underground Sea, play Ruby, Time Walk, and then hope to draw a land so you can DT Ancestral with Mental Misstep backup, or you can just go turn 1 Thoughtseize, hope Steve doesn't have Wasteland.
Mm-hmm. What does Steve's draw? Just a single island?
With a Brainstorm, Steve's got the kind of draw where if Brainstorm and his top card misses, he could just do nothing for a bunch of turns. But he has double force, so he's not completely out of it.
Even if he does miss. Yeah, fair. I assume Rich is keeping those 6.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if he ends up shipping that net. And Steve, I guess, deciding whether he wants to mulligan. The thing is, like, there are some matches where this would be a very good hand, I think, just because against like a combo deck, like if Steve was, let's say, playing against your deck, right? You know, Storm combo. This is a very good hand. Against an incremental advantage deck like Rich's that isn't really doing that much in the first few turns, having a bunch of forces and flusterstorms in your opening hand isn't all that great. You don't want to force a Night's Whisper. So Steve might be considering that if he misses on land, then brainstorms and misses on land in the next 3, he just does nothing for a ton of turns. That being said, I would keep the hand, as I demonstrated by keeping a much worse one.
Yes, you did. Yeah, that's so we're on Steve right now, who's contemplating whether to mulligan the 7, right?
It looks like Steve actually kept.
Steve kept?
Yeah. So
what are we're wait? It says waiting on Smemon.
It's on Rich's upkeep right now.
Oh, okay. What's he thinking during upkeep about?
I think they're probably waiting to be told to start.
Oh, they're waiting to be told whether to start. Somebody tell them to start.
Yeah.
All right.
Looks like some of the Skype chats blocking Steve hands even.
Got it.
So if you're Rich, do you turn 1 DT or do you turn 1 Time Walk or do you turn 1 Thoughtseize? He's got 3 very viable options there.
Yeah, I'm not in love with Time Walk when all it does is cycle and hope to hit a land. I feel like you can often do better than that. Maybe here it is better because of the possibility that any land turns on DT Ancestral.
Yeah, the other thing you have to consider, which I think leans towards Time Walking here, one of the reasons I actually kind of like it, is Steve's got Wastelands and Strip Mine in his deck. If you like DT or Thoughtseize, then get Wastelanded, you could potentially just be doing nothing.
That's a good point.
So Steve, I don't think he's in a position where he really wants to force this. I mean,
I don't think so.
He could, but it does not sound great to me. I generally don't fight over Time Walk in most circumstances.
Agreed. And now, if you whiff on land, do you Thoughtseize instead of Demonic Tutoring, or do you want to spend all your mana?
It's tough. I would probably Demonic Tutor, because that way if you draw another blue or black source, you can then Thoughtseize plus Ancestral. Because at this point, as much as I maligned Ancestral before, you do kind of have to go for it, like when you have nothing.
That's what this draw does. Time Vault. Well, they have new plans for the Demonic Tutor.
Yeah, that could be a little different. Yeah.
I mean, I'm probably demonicking for Voltaic Key now. I think you just play Time Vault, say go.
And then hope to draw Lotus or Academy. So you can go off in one turn. But
yeah, Rich is just going to resolve the Time Vault, which is going to be a very looming threat. Voltaic Key becomes lethal once Time Vault resolves.
It's so funny. When you don't have key, Time Vault's so bad. Like you're just sitting there like, well, why did I draw the stupid Time Vault? But your opponent is always like, I'm 1 card away from dead. Because like having a Time Vault in play is a pretty huge threat.
Yeah.
See, if Steve drew a Wasteland, that could be huge. Wasteland or Strip Mine are both among his best draws. He actually does know that now because Rich didn't play a land turn 2. So if Steve drew a way to kill a land, he would definitely use it.
He drew Volcanic.
Chose to just play Island so as to not represent Pyroblast, even though he doesn't have it, which is kind of interesting. Mountain is Rich right now. Mountain is just not good here. I kind of like just Thoughtseizing here, just seeing what you're up against, because you're getting to enough mana where you maybe can Well, I guess this plays around that better. You do get Flusterstorm. Steve's almost assuredly going to Flusterstorm here. Like, the only reason not to Flusterstorm, I suppose, is if you want to set up a turn where you're like fighting over force, and maybe you're worried about.
Sorry, what do you think's going on? You can pay for Flusterstorm here.
No, I mean it makes it a storm. So.
Oh, sorry, I'm.
But Rich can do what he did last game, which is mental misstep it back, which I think Rich will do. And then Steve has to decide whether he wants to force. Because the thing is, the DT is going for Voltaic Key. I think
that's true.
While you normally want to force the card your opponent gets, having your opponent have a 1-drop win the game card in like sitting in their hand means that it restricts your plays so much that I'm kind of in favor of just countering Tutor when it's in this situation. Like if you thought Rich was getting like Tinker, it'd be different. The only disadvantage to countering Tutor, of course, is that if Rich gets Key and then you draw a misstep off Gush plus Brainstorm, then you end up in a pretty good spot.
So you would Flusterstorm here if you're Menendian.
I think so, because for two reasons. One, you can't Flusterstorm Voltaic Key. Like, yes, you can Flusterstorm the ensuing fight over it, but you can't. But Key is so cheap. Second, Rich has a lot of cheap spells in his deck, so you might end up in a position where a natural Flusterstorm's not doing anything. And then third, it actually lets you use your mana a lot better. Like this way, next turn you can Gush plus Brainstorm. So I'm curious to what Steve's reason for not doing that is. Maybe he wants to play on Mental Misstep because this turn Flusterstorm does get misstepped, so that is valid. Maybe he wants to Brainstorm end of turn. That seems a little less good. You'd see so many more cards if you just end up doing it later. I think if you're Rich, you absolutely do not cast the Voltaic Key this turn, though.
Yeah, right. All right. Well, there is the Voltaic Key, and Rich is going to sit. He's going to wait. He wants to try to Thoughtseize to clear a path. And path is going to be too complicated, and then we'll have to see how the game plays out from there.
Yeah, Steve didn't Brainstorm in a turn, which I like.
Agreed.
So the question now is, Rich is going to cast Thoughtseize to kick things off. Steve's probably going to Mental Misstep it. Rich is going to misstep back. The question is, does Steve fight over it and let Rich see that he's got, a handful of counters, or does he just let it resolve because it trades 1 for 1?
I think you
Forceful Thoughtseize is pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah, I agree. I think you let it resolve. All right. Well, there's the Thoughtseize.
And then the misstep happens. Yeah.
Misstep back is almost certainly going to happen.
I think you just Flusterstorm here is my guess.
Oh, because now you are trading 1 for 1. Yeah, I like that line. Better than letting him see exactly what he has to play through. Because there's definitely value when you're the Thoughtseize guy. You want to see their hand. I mean, even if you think they spent their last counterspell on it, you never know for sure.
Yeah, and the question is, if let's say Thoughtseize gets countered here, does Rich just go for the key? I probably would. Like, yeah, I mean, if it gets countered, then you're out of key and you have to Yawgmoth's or Welder it back. But if it resolves, you just win the game, and your hand is not getting much better. You're not gonna have like too much more backup in the next few turns. I mean, Nice Whisper helps, but
Nice Whisper does help a little bit. All right, well, here comes the Flusterstorm that Steve chose not to point at the Demonic Tutor because he thought it might be better here.
Yeah, I mean, this works out. This ends up roughly the same.
Yeah.
Because like last turn, it would have traded for Misstep. I assume Rich would have gone over to Misstep, and I think Steve would have not forced the Demonic Tutor at that point. Then this turn, Rich would have Thoughtseize, Steve would have Mental Misstep, and Rich would not have had a Mental Misstep to fight back. So we'd end up in, I think, the same position, depending on how both players play.
Now, does Rich go for Voltaic Key?
I think you got to. I think
it does. Right. And Menendian's got multiple ways to stop it.
I would actually lean towards pitching Brainstorm here. I mean,
yeah, I think I agree.
Basically it's Brainstorm or Gush, or not Gush. Sorry, Brainstorm or Force of Will, or cast Gush. Like, I don't think you pitch Gush here. I think that's
agreed.
Worst of all the worlds. So it looks like Steve's going to cast Gush, which I assume means a follow.
He drew 2 Gushes. Is that what happened there? Hilarious. He drew Gush.
So Steve's actually part of the reason to do this is you look for Mental Missteps, so you can get much more value. And it looks like he hit Ruby Volcanic and presumably not Mental Misstep. All right, so Steve's actually going to be doing nothing for a few turns. Actually, Nice Whisper is going to shine here. Steve's going to have to force this. He's probably going to pitch a Gush, so he can keep a force in hand. Crazy. And then Rich is going to cast Nice Whisper next turn. Steve's doing nothing for 2 turns, basically. Or at least the first turn he's doing nothing. The second turn he can Gush. And Rich gets to cast Nice Whisper, and is Steve really going to force pitch and gush on that? That does not seem like what he wants to do.
Now you have to let Nice Whisper resolve, I think.
Rich is going to potentially grind Steve out with Nice Whispers here. Like, imagine if Rich drew a Welder this turn. I guess it gets bolted, so Welder not.
He throws a Notion Thief. That's not nothing.
Yeah, it also gets bolted, so Steve's probably pretty happy with that draw if you could see it.
Yeah, Nice Whisper resolves. Lotus, Force of Will.
Wow, so Rich has a multitude of cards he could draw to just win the game.
Yes, sir.
Tinker, Yawgmoth's Will both just immediately do it, and then
Tinker doesn't immediately do it, right?
Well, he gets a Mirror Battlesphere. And
Sure.
I don't think Steve could beat it from this position. Yeah, I mean, I understand it doesn't actually let him go off, but
does Rich have a Tezzeret in his list or no?
No, he does not.
I think he did. Dak Faden is obviously ridiculous here. That's the combo that he won game 1 with.
Yeah, Dak Faden would not be bad. Though we're assuming the Notion Thief gets bolted.
Yeah, that's fair.
I don't think it's unreasonable for Steve to gush here, but it's pretty risky because you really want the force, and then like you're back down to having all lands in hand. You actually could end up discarding.
Yeah, I'm not even sure Rich wants to play the Notion Thief since it's the blue card for the Force of Will. I guess he can hardcast Force of Will.
Yeah, I think it's actually fine to like Notion Thief, end of turn or something.
Yeah.
And then if it gets killed or countered, whatever, you just untap and have force ready.
Yeah, I'll buy that. Steve's logging through the lands he put back with Brainstorm.
I think it's good to keep this gush here just because if you end up in a spot where
it's your blue card.
Yeah. I like this place. Rich just untapped his Time Vault. Since Steve's not doing anything,
wow.
He just stepped the turn back. So now Rich has Time Walk floating.
Nice.
Which can lead to some good plays when you've got expensive cards going on.
Nice. That is not something you see all that often.
Preordain's actually a good thing to kick things off with. I could see gushing first because now you have a blue card and, worst comes to worst. So I assume a gush has to evoke a Notion Thief from Rich, at which point Steve lets Notion Thief resolve, then bolts it. And then draws 2 cards, then casts Preordain.
Is he going to hard cash Gus here? Is that tempting?
No, I think he just wants to have the mana just in case like something happens. I guess he's just going to lead with Preordain. I would actually probably just Notion Thief the Preordain too. I mean, I don't know. Rich might be waiting for a blue card with backup, but Notion Thief is vulnerable to so many cards, and Steve's just doing nothing. So I find it hard to resist doing this.
Yep, Rich agrees. He can no longer cast Force of Will, for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, I mean, it means he's not able to counter this turn, but Steve has no like insane plays.
Right, there's no haymakers. There's no Force of Will is a way for Rich to force through his own win. It's not a way to muck around with what Steve's up to. All right, so like you said, Steve lets the Notion Thief resolve and then bolts it before the Preordain resolves. Now we're resolving Preordain.
And remember, Rich is kind of phantom up 1 card here because he's got that Time Vault ready to go.
Right. He skipped a turn in order to untap Time Vault. Like
he's using Time Vault the way it was meant to be used. That's
exactly. Exactly.
So Steve, this is the spot that this is exactly what I was talking about in game 1. This is the spot that the Delver decks don't really love to be in. Yes, Steve is ahead by like a little bit here, but he has no threat out, and Rich has so many cards that are so much more powerful. Jaces and Dak Fadens that Steve has to like get 2 for 1 to counter. And I don't know. I think Steve's doing all right because he's drawing a bunch of cards here, but this is not the kind of game in general that the Delver decks love playing.
Flusterstorm and a Fire Ice.
Like Flusterstorm's losing value every turn. Yeah. Rich has 7 mana in play. Like there are a lot of spells Rich could cast that just can't get Flusterstormed.
Yeah, no clock from Steve. This is not the way the deck was drawn up.
Yeah, I mean, basically, this is the kind of game you want to play while you cast a turn 1 Delver, and then Steve would have won many turns ago. But
yeah, exactly.
He just has happened not to see any of his creatures, so he's going to end up not necessarily in a spot where he gets to pressure his opponent. And at this point, you probably have to keep most of the threats you see. I mean, you've got a Force and a Flusterstorm, so you're doing okay on counter magic. Rich only has 1 card in hand plus the Time Vault card, so that's not too bad.
Wow, the chat just pointed out a crazy play. Menendian can ice the Time Vault.
Yeah, Rich can just tap it in response, though.
Oh, okay. It doesn't actually do anything. Right.
Well, it forces Rich to take an extra turn now instead of like after he casts Jace, but no, it's not like absurd or anything. So okay. Steve kept Mystical Tutor, which I think is reasonable because at this point in the game, just getting Ancestral is fine. So Rich just needs to draw threats now. I mean, he's got, Sapphire's worth playing.
Mm-hmm.
just because it lets him hardcast Force of Will, but it's not really what he
Not
wants.
attacking his Lotus.
Yeah.
Taking your time vault turn or letting it float?
Yeah. I would have been inclined to let it float, but I think taking it is fine. Just because you've got enough mana that so many cards are live now, which is nice. But if you let it float, maybe you can end up forcing Steve to overextend, then hoping to draw another threat. You just want to draw Night's Whispers. Ooh, the
Battle Sphere. He can cast it.
Yeah, it looks like he's just going to run it.
He's got no blue card.
Yeah.
Sack the Lotus, and he can't defend it with Force of Will. But
I think part of Rich's strategy here, and part of the reason he did this, is that he figures Force of Will is probably dead to Pyroblast anyway. So waiting until he draws a blue card is not going to be great.
Yeah, by that. And yeah, this forces a Force of Will. You can't Flusterstorm a Battle Sphere.
Yeah, it's going to get forced. I actually don't hate pitching Flusterstorm here, given how much mana Rich has. Though no, Rich is down to 5 mana, so maybe you don't. I mean, it's that or Fire Ice. I think you're clearly planning on tutoring for Ancestral, unless you know your top card. Which Rich could, or Steve could know, because he did Preordain.
Sure. Fire Ice seems the weakest of these to me.
Yeah, Flusterstorm might be worse just because it does not very many cards it counters, but Fire Ice just cycles right now, so I guess Flusterstorm is slightly better than your average card.
I guess that really is the question. All right, no Battle Sphere for Rich Shay, but he has really just presented threats that Menendian had to counter, and Menendian's not doing anything except staying alive.
Yeah, he's going to draw 3 cards here, but he could potentially not draw, a Pyromancer or a Delver, and honestly, a Delver is good, but if Rich draws 2 action cards in the next 4 turns, Delver won't necessarily be enough because most of Rich's action cards do beat a lone Delver.
Yep. Well, there's the Ancestral. That was a good Ancestral. Force of Will, Time Walk, and Snapcaster?
Never mind. I think Steve might be in pretty commanding shape now. He just drew a second Ancestral plus a Force plus a Time Walk. So wow. I think Steve's actually in pretty good shape.
Yeah, that Ancestral was insane.
Yeah, those basically the 3 best cards in Steve's deck. Maybe a young Pyromancer over a Force of Will, but even then, Force of Will is very good against an opponent with a few cards in hand.
Not dying. That's what it's been doing all game. Yeah, I mean, the players had basically gotten into a top deck war where Rich has better cards in his deck to top deck. But I don't know that Steve was ever actually in top deck mode. He was sitting on the Mystical. He Mystical for Ancestral.
And now Rich draws the Rubin Tinker, which has no targets left to get.
The Battle Sphere's in the graveyard. The other half of the Vault Key combo's in the graveyard. There's, basically nothing left to go get. It's a blue card to pitch with Force of Will.
Yeah, which is not going to be good enough here. Steve's going to presumably go for end of turn.
I mean, if he end of turn Snapcaster's Ancestral, then he doesn't have Flusterstorm mana?
Yeah, I guess waiting a turn is probably safer.
I think so. Especially if you're going to draw Black Lotus.
Yeah, Lotus isn't bad. It's not the card Steve would choose to put on top of his deck, but it's definitely not bad.
Yeah, I mean, it brings hard casting Force of Will into play.
Yeah. Now you certainly go for the Ancestral. If you're Rich, I think you just hardcast Force.
Yeah.
I mean,
agreed.
You might as well not let Snapcaster enter the battlefield here. Steve's then gonna, I think, just use Flusterstorm just because it's pretty tempting to.
He can Flusterstorm, he can Ancestral, he can Time Walk.
Yeah, Steve is gonna win this game, I think, unless something pretty catastrophic happens.
Great game.
Yeah, this is
really interesting.
Was no hard cast Blightsteel Colossus, but there was a hard cast Battle Sphere.
Yeah, you get bonus points for actually resolving it, though.
That's true. And attack. Well, I didn't get to attack. A concession was given, so I guess that kind of counts. Yeah. Steve can also draw something like Ancient Grudge, which, while I get that Time Vault doesn't have a ton of support right now, it does mean Yawgmoth's Will, for example, is no longer lethal.
Right. Although it's pretty close. There's a Lotus in there. You just put it all back into play.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I guess Steve has enough, or Rich has enough mana. Oh.
Another Ancestral. There's the Ancient Grudge you wanted. A second Force of Will, a Ponder. And there's a creature that can attack and deal damage.
Steve kind of has it all here. I would be surprised if he lost this game. Like, Rich would have to draw a pretty amazing sequence of plays.
It only took him 29 cards to find a creature to attack with. But now we're back to plan A, attacking and countering around the sides.
Has Steve not played a land this turn? I thought he had not yet played a land, but maybe I'm wrong. Because if he hasn't played a land, he can just island time walk.
Yeah, I think he did play land, and he's going to have to sack the Lotus if he wants to walk.
Yeah, that's probably fine, though. It's not like you have any 7-mana spells in your deck, so I think Lotus time walk is pretty reasonable here.
Yeah, you also get to fire off Preordain? Probably Preordain.
Looks like he's just turning Lotus into a Taiga and just double grudge there.
Hilarious.
That's reasonable. Kill the Sapphire also. I would have probably just Lotus time walked, grudged. So
untap grudge.
Yeah,
Lotus time walk, untap grudge. I guess he wants 2 blue cards, 2 Force of Wills. So time walk has got a second mission.
Yeah, I suppose maybe he's just got such a low percentage of actual threats, actual blue cards maybe, that he'd rather just have time walk as, instead of deal 2 damage, draw a card, he'd rather just use it to pitch to force. That makes sense too.
Yeah.
Saving time walk till you have Pyromance is actually probably better. Yeah, never mind. Casting time walk actually would have not been good. You're not really in a hurry there, so just double grudging is probably better. I still would probably cast Ponder here. You can already hard cast a Force of Will.
Well, now that he's untapped again, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe Steve's just leaving up hardcast Force plus Force pitching like Ponder. But I don't think you hate finding a better clock here. Like, if you find a Pyromancer, you could end the game in like 2 turns or something. Depending on what else you find.
He's in great shape, though.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Steve is going to have to, like, Ponder, Brick, Shuffle, have Rich draw his best card, force it, Ponder, Brick, have Rich draw second best card, force it, Brick. Like, Rich has to basically draw 3 good spells in a row, and Steve has to draw, like, no good spells and, like, 7 cards, which is not
So you're saying there's a chance?
It's not 0%.
It's not 0.
But it's not high.
Yeah, he has to, and it's, how many must counter threats are there even left? Like the Dak Faden, maybe?
Not even a must counter. Like,
Yawgmoth's Will is awesome.
But other than that, there's not a whole lot. Yeah, I think Steve's putting the nail in the coffin. And these are the worst games to play from Rich's side. Like, when you know you're dead, but you obviously can't concede. I mean, things could still happen. I wonder if Steve pulls the trigger on Time Walk now. Trigon Time Walk lets him immediately untap, kill Mox.
Attack for 4.
Looks like he's just going to keep saving it and keep Force up, which is safer.
Brainstorm, that's one way to draw a bunch of threats.
Yeah, I think you just have to cast it. You're losing so quickly.
Yeah.
I don't even know if you countered if you're Steve. If Rich doesn't find a shuffle, then it's just not really anything.
Yeah, he let it resolve. There's no shuffle. Well, so, technically Tinker can shuffle.
Yeah, I was going to say, Rich could...
Just doesn't get anything.
Put back Tinker Pearl, then go fire your Snapcaster with Force Misstep back up, or, well, one of the two. I guess, and that still is just not great. Yeah, I don't really think Rich has an easy way out of this, or a hard way, or a way at all. So I kind of saw the beginning of this debate on Twitter. Do you think people are going to start calling things like Rug Delver, Teamer Delver?
I don't know.
It's pretty tight, right? Like,
well, the problem with Rug Delver is sort of a straw man argument, because it already is Rug Delver, so you're actively trying to change it.
Right.
I mean, I feel like the next
that's more what I mean, though.
The next red, blue, green blank deck is going to be Teamer.
Yeah, I think if someone made a tight, standard deck that had, the Teamer colors, they would call it Teamer. But
even the next legacy deck that uses the Teamer colors but does something that it's to do retcon the existing decks. The retcon conversation is less clear to me.
Right. Like, I think it's pretty easy to switch to calling blue, white, red, and modern like Jeskai Control, because that's the name and that works out fine. But
sure.
But Rug Delver and Bug Delver are just pretty established names right now. So yeah. I think you see more resistance to that.
Yeah, it's like trying to switch Affinity over to robots.
Which
don't care if there's no Affinity cards left in the list. The deck is affinity no longer means what it started out meaning, right? It's now this proper name that's refers to the archetype.
We're trying to switch or trying to call stacks something other than stacks.
Exactly.
I'm not defending that at large, though. I think that there aren't that many people who do that. That just happens to be me. But so Steve floated Time Walk for a second, tapped the 2 mana, then decided, I'm not going to Time Walk. If Rich didn't do anything last turn, he's not drawing anything relevant this turn unless he needed all 4 of his cards at once or something.
Yeah, I think if I'm Steve, I would try to get Trigon or Time Walk. So you take away 2 or 3 draw steps.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think Rich is kind of bottlenecked on blue, but I do think I probably at some point would have fired off a Time Walk here, and then if it resolved, played Trigon.
Yeah.
Rich going for the Tinker with no cards left. And Steve actually should know there's nothing left, because Steve knows the list at this point.
He calls up the list.
He immediately goes to look at the list.
Funny.
That is great. I mean, that's what I would do too. Like, if my opponent cast Tinker, I would just be like, and Battlesphere and Vault Key were already gone. Like, what is he getting? Did I miss something? Was there something in the sideboard? Does Rich have something sick in the sideboard? No, he does not. Yeah, so at that point, I guess you let it resolve. I mean, upgrading a Pearl to a Soul Ring or something is not the end of the world. Does Rich even have a Sensei's Divine Top? I do not believe he does. Yeah, he does not look like Sensei's Divine Top's even present. Steve, double checking, because you don't want to be the guy who lets Tinker resolve when you have 4 counterspells and has your opponent get a Blightsteel Colossus. So that would be an uncomfortable situation if that happened now.
Yeah.
I guess, no, Rich does have a Mind... Oh, no, this is week 1. He does not have a
Week
Mind
1 he had a Mindslaver.
Yeah, he does not even have a Sensei's Divine Top, so...
Speaking of names that stick around even though they no longer technically apply, this is still a Control Slaver list in my mind. Even
sure, yeah, I buy that.
Yeah, the Pearl is now a Jet and a Reshuffle.
Well, Jet is better than Pearl, so you did upgrade.
Certainly did not upgrade enough for Steve to want to spend a Force of Will.
Steve, the reason I like Steve going for Time Walk here is that Steve has more counters than Rich can have draw steps, I think, if he does that. Though Rich does have 2 cards in hand, but still.
I'm with you. Yeah, I mean, Steve's just trying to guard against worst case scenarios. Here comes Trigon. Here comes Trigon.
I would have probably led with Time Walk. I think you do want to cast Time Walk when you have Trigon in play. I guess it doesn't matter which one you lead with if you're just going to counter any resistance regardless.
Yeah. Here is Time Walk. Rich can pitch Force of Will.
Yeah, you have to know you're pretty much losing. And actually,
yeah,
Steve can't actually lose, I think, anyway. But if Rich went down to 8 from pitching to 4, Steve Pyroblast to attack Rich down to 4, have a counter spell. I mean, I think this is lethal regardless. So it looks like the only person who could potentially stop Steve at this point could be me. I'm playing him next week.
Oh, you play him next week? Wow, that's a big match. 4-1 versus 5-0.
Depending on how these other matches go, I guess at this point the only.
Well, Eric is 4-1.
Yeah, we're looking at Ephro at 4-1, me at 4-1, Steve at 5-0. I think, assuming this happens. So
yes,
I could.
Chris dropped to 3-2, so there were.
I could be tied with Steve for first if Ephro loses next round. Or I could be like somewhere in like the 3rd range. I guess actually it's tied. I could be tied for second if Ephro loses and I lose.
Right. But then other people sneak into it, like Chris or possibly me. I guess it's just Chris and me, hypothetically.
Yeah, and you still got a match to play.
Yeah, I still have a match this week, so I'm not
against a matchup which I don't think is your favorite.
I actually think the matchup is in my favor.
Really?
The thing is, so his dredge list, all he has are mental missteps against me. He doesn't have any Force of Wills. He doesn't have any Mind Break traps. He doesn't have any Chalices. Like, there are dredge lists that are favored to beat me, I think, but that's not one of them.
Right. So I thought you were playing Bob.
No, I'm playing Tom.
Yeah. If you were playing Bob, I think it would be in Bob's favor, is my assumption.
Oh, totally agree. Yeah, no.
But yes, I actually like. I think you're one of the best decks in the field against dredge.
Yeah, I'm the only deck that doesn't have to sideboard against dredge because I'm actually faster.
Right.
which is why, like I say, I only really fear the dredge decks that have crazy counterspell shenanigans. Like you can run Mindbreak Trap in your dredge deck is one of those off spots, and then that's really annoying for me. All right, well, there's the lightning bolt to finish it off, and Steve Menendian goes to 5-0.
Impressive.
Stays undefeated. Rich falls to 2-3. And yeah, next up is going to be me against Tom Martell. Certainly have enjoyed having you hang out with us, Luis.
Yeah, no problem.
We will cycle the booth. Looks like we're actually going to get Rich Shay in the booth for the next round. He and Eric will cast the match between Tom and I.
Sounds good.
We'll be right back. Stay tuned.